Hier, hoi ho.
Hoi hoi ho. Hey, die hoi ho, Kevin, ça va?
Dat Gaelic is precies wel vrij gemakkelijk zo.
Klinkt vrolijk in ieder geval.
Ja. Dit is trouwens Babelonië.
Ja.
Elke eerste en zaterdag van de maand. Ongeveer.
Eerste en derde, hè?
Eerste en derde.
Ja.
Eerste en derde zaterdag. En dit was de band Runrig van Schotland.
En waar hadden ze het over?
Dat weet ik eigenlijk niet.
Ah, jij verstaat dat niet, want jij verstaat Welsh, hè? Maar...
Ja, Welsh een beetje, maar Schots Gaelisch zo niet.
Nee. Ah nee, dat is een andere tak natuurlijk.
Ja.
En waarom hebben we dat opgezet?
Omdat dat het thema voor vandaag is. Want we hebben iemand uitgenodigd om over te spreken. Die ga ik direct opbellen. Ik ga zelfs nog een nummertje opzetten, ook weer in het Schots Gaelisch. Het gaat over het Schots Gaelisch, voor alle duidelijkheid. Dus niet over het Manx Gaelisch of het Iers Gaelisch. Maar dus over dat van Alba.
Alba, ja. Ik wist niet dat dat de naam van Schotland was.
Ik vermoed dat Albion is zo heel Groot-Brittannië. Ja? En Alba zal waarschijnlijk... Dat kunnen we zelfs eens vragen.
Ja, want dat was al een vraag die ik had. En wie gaan we bellen?
Michelle NicLeòid van de Bòrd Gaelic. Dat is de Schotse...
De Schotse Raad.
Taalorganisatie die veel met taalbeleid en zo bezig is daar.
En wat doet zij daar? Of?
Dat zullen we zelfs moeten
e-mails beantwoorden.
Ja, e-mails beantwoorden en af en toe een radio-interview doen voor mensen.
Juist.
Dus dat gaan we zelfs vragen. Ik ga ze zelfs eens opbellen. Voilà. Runrig, die zijn in de jaren 70 begonnen. Dat was een soort van Schotse rockband. En die waren daar toen eigenlijk vrij bekend geworden omwille van het feit dat ze de allereerste rockband waren die hun eerste album volledig in Schots Gaelic hebben genomen.
En spelen die nog steeds?
Die zijn wel wat van bezetting veranderd, denk ik. Want de zanger is er geloof ik niet meer bij. Maar ik denk dat die nog altijd bezig zijn. Ja.
Dat zijn zo van die elknarren die van geen opwouden weten. Zo.
Ja, inderdaad. Zo. Ik heb die live gezien, lang geleden.
Ah ja?
En die waren best wel leutig, ja. Voilà. Maar misschien ga ik, want het is al 5 na, anders hebben we niet veel meer om over te spreken zelfs. Ik ga er nog eentje opzetten van de band Nightworks, dat is iets recenter, maar ik heb onlangs gelezen dat die blijkbaar dit jaar ook weer mee gaan stoppen. Dat is wel een beetje...
Ah, en dat is ook Schots Gaelic?
Dat is Schots Gaelic, maar die maken meer zo electro-house dance toestanden.
Oké.
Dit is een nummer dat ik totaal niet ken, dus ik ben eens benieuwd wat dat dan wordt. Maar ik ga dat opzetten en dan kunnen we... mevrouw NicLeòid bellen.
En op Radio Centraal kan alles, hè. Dus, voilà.
Alright, Nightworks was dit. Okay, Michelle, can you hear us?
Can hear you fine, yeah.
Okay, we can hear you too. Very good. Hi, welcome to our show. Well, you might not know us because you're in a very different country, so you probably don't listen to our radio station. But our show is all about language and everything that surrounds it, culture, and whatever comes with it. And we were very interested in the Scottish Gaelic language because it's a part of Scotland that's often forgotten these days, at least in our... on our side of the sea.
Yeah.
So we invited you. Maybe you can introduce yourself and tell us what you are exactly doing at the Bòrd Gaelic, because that's the organization that you work for.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Michelle NicLeòid. I am a Scottish Government appointed member of Bòrd Gaelic, and Bòrd Gaelic exists to promote the language across Scotland. I am a government appointee, so I'm not an employee of Bòrd Gaelic, and my day job is a professor of Scottish Gaelic at the University of Aberdeen, where I teach Gaelic language and I carry out research into language policy and also Gaelic literature and culture.
Hi, I'm Ace. I'm the person who does the program together with Kevin.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Okay. Maybe we should start with locating the language, because most people will gather that it's a Celtic language, but when you say Gaelic, most people will automatically be thinking of Ireland. But Scottish Gaelic, that's something quite different, is it?
Sure. So Scottish Gaelic is a Celtic language, as you said, a Q Celtic language, very closely related to Irish. It came to Scotland around the 6th, 7th century, maybe some early migrants to Scotland in the 4th 5th century also, and arrived in the southwest of Scotland and then spread throughout much of Scotland up until around the 10th century. But it is a Celtic language, a degree of mutual intelligibility with Irish and Manx, and less closely related to Welsh and Breton and Cornish.
So, how did Scottish come to? How did the Gaelic language come to Scotland? Did it come on its own? I suppose there were people speaking it who brought it with them.
Yeah. So the parts of Scotland and Ireland are very close to each other. Only about 12 sea miles separating the north coast of Ireland, so Antrim, to Argyll in the southwest of Scotland. And when the early Irish immigrants came to Scotland, they brought the language with them. We generally think of a mass migration around the 6th century, but there was certainly a lot of sporadic migration of Irish speakers into Scotland, to the south of Scotland, around the 3rd or 4th century. But we think of a mass migration around the 5th or 6th century with the peoples of Dalriada. And for a while they shared a kingdom across Argyll, where they first settled in the southwest of Scotland, and the north coast of Ireland. So there was a shared kingdom across the waters. And for a very long time, there was a lot of coming and going between Gaelic Scotland and Gaelic Ireland. We shared a common language for a period of time before the languages began to diverge, and before the political and the social influences caused the Gaelic speakers and the Irish speakers to focus more on their national territories rather on their shared cultural and linguistic origins.
Mm-hmm. So, but when those people arrived there was nobody living there, or?
No, there were certainly people living in Scotland. When they arrived in Scotland, they met in the 5th century AD, approximately. They met Picts. So the Picts were a group of people that inhabited much of the north of Scotland, speaking a language called Pictish. We don't know an awful lot about this language. It is possibly a form of P-Celtic, but not entirely Celtic language. And there was other British Celts, so other P-Celtic speaking tribes in the south of Scotland. So yeah, there was certainly Scotland was inhabited, and the Gaels gradually took over the territory of the Picts, and the Britons in the south and the Pictish speakers between the 6th and the 10th century, and unified Scotland. So it really was the Gaels that brought together this concept of Scotland as we think of it today, although Gaelic was never spoken in the northern islands of Shetland and Orkney. They were either Norse-speaking, belonging to Norway, or eventually being part of modern Scotland in the 16th century. Sorry, the 13th century.
And do you have an idea when the two languages started to drift apart and were no longer? Are they still? Can people from Ireland hear and understand Scottish Gaelics and vice versa?
Yeah, there's certainly a degree of mutual intelligibility. So there's a lot of similarities in a lot of the vocabulary, and it's quite easy for a good Gaelic speaker or a fluent Irish speaker to be able to understand a lot of what is said in the other language. But we have written evidence of divergence of the two languages from around about the 11th century, but we think they probably began diverging a little bit earlier than that, and certainly by the 12th century, 16th century later on, we would think of them as by the 16th century, we would think of them as two distinct languages.
Mm-hmm. And what about the Manx Gaelic language? Is that a part of one of the two, or a different one in its own?
Yeah, it's different. It is different. It is syntactically closer to Irish than it is to Scottish Gaelic. But again, there's a degree of mutual intelligibility between Irish and Manx and Scottish Gaelic.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it's still actively spoken?
Yeah, sure. There's around about 60,000 speakers of Scottish Gaelic in Scotland at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
60,000 or 16?
So 60. So it's
60.
Yeah.
1% of the population of Scotland can speak Gaelic.
So
more are learning, but that would be number of speakers, self-reporting speakers.
The native language speakers then?
Mostly native language speakers, although those last figures from the census, more than 10 years ago, we don't have our most recent census figures. Most of them would have been native speakers, but I think some second language speakers or some learners would have recorded themselves as Gaelic speakers as well, because we do have a number of very fluent Gaelic learners also.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and the board you are working for is set up to promote the use of the language. And when was it erected? The board?
Sure. Yeah. So the board was established in 2004 by the Scottish Government. It is what we call a non-departmental public body. So it does function as similar to a government department, but it's independent to government. And the purpose of the board is to ensure that the Gaelic Language Act is all the requirements of the Language Act are brought into effect.
Yeah. So the implementation of some treaty or some.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Scottish Gaelic Language Act came into force in 2005, and it's the board's duty to implement, as you say, all of the content of that Language Act.
Mm-hmm. And is there some relation to the 1992 European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages?
We certainly, across the UK, the Scottish Government and the government in London, the Westminster Government, were signatories to that charter.
Yeah. I saw you have your own extension. I didn't know that. On the internet, we have .be for .be for Belgium, but there is also a .scot. .scot.
Yeah. It's not common yet, but it is there.
Not common. Okay, I had never seen it before.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we can talk about the present and the future later. Maybe there's more to talk about the past, because I imagine at some point the Gaelic language was it ever like a majority language in Scotland? Because I imagine that there must have been like Saxons and the sorts of the like very early on. There must have been quite a clash also in terms of linguistics. It still is today, like the Scots, what some would call the Scottish dialect.
Yeah.
Has it always been the case?
Yes. So when Gaelic arrived in Scotland, as I said, it met different groups of people. The Britons, who spoke a form of early Welsh, and later on they met the Angles, who inhabited the southeast of Scotland. But it was the Gaels, or the Scots, the Latin people called them Scotti, and it's from that term that we get the word Scotland. So it was the Gaelic speakers that pretty much brought Scotland together as a unified country, as opposed to a group of independently run kingdoms with different cultural and linguistic outlooks. So by the 11th century, we have the kings of Scotland as Gaelic speakers, but they didn't maintain that position for very long, unfortunately. Well, unfortunately for me as a Gaelic speaker, once they'd unified Scotland, they began to look to Europe and to England, and there was intermarriage, of course, as there was across all of Europe with royal families, and very soon the language of the court of the kings of Scotland changed from Gaelic to Norman French and to English and to Scots. But certainly by the 11th or 12th century, Gaelic was no longer the language of the kings of Scotland, although it was still very widely spoken across Scotland at that point. It was no longer the language of the kings.
Yeah, of course, we also had this French phase.
Yeah, yes, we did. Yeah. The Norman French, one of our kings, one of the last truly Gaelic-speaking kings, Malcolm Canmore in the 10th century, the 11th century, married Margaret, who had spent a long time in France and in England, but was really a French speaker herself.
So, and she influenced...
She influenced the direction of the court and therefore of the country quite significantly by bringing up their family no longer as thinking of themselves primarily or only as Scots or Gaels, but as perhaps early Europeans, people with who looked to the south, to England and across the continent for cultural and linguistic influence.
Mm-hmm. By the way, we were wondering prior to the show, the name Alba, that's the name for Scotland in Gaelic, I presume?
That's right, Alba, yeah.
Where does that come from? What does it mean?
A good question. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I know that it does exist in Spanish, but it's a name that we've had for a long time. So I'm going to have to pass on the derivation of Alba, I'm afraid.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, yeah, the name is not that important. Okay, so...
no, but I find it intriguing because Great Britain is called Albion or something like that.
In Latin, it's called
Albion. In Latin, that's correct, yeah. And of course, Britain refers to Celt. It refers to the P-Celt. That's where that term first comes from.
The Welsh and...
the Welsh from the Brecon and the Cornish, yeah.
And then the name Alba might have been derived from Albion then, or something like that.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It is a term that was used in early texts, but the Latin scholars tended to write about Scotia for Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Scotia sounds more like the Latin, like Nova Scotia.
That's the new one.
Speaking of which, there is a Scottish Gaelic community in Canada.
There's even something called Canadian Gaelic.
That's correct. Yeah,
so
I can talk about that either now or shortly about how that happened. But there is still Gaelic speakers in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Are they like recent migrants, or when I suppose the Scottish went along with the ride when the English went overseas to colonize?
Yeah, I mean, there's different waves of migration to Canada and to the New World, as writers about Scotland use the terminology New World to talk about Canada, the US, Australia and New Zealand. So we have migration from Gaelic-speaking areas in Scotland to these starting as early as the 1700s. at that time, the 1700s, 1800s in particular, this was forced migration when Gaelic speakers were being evicted from their own territories because of various social and political elements, policies, where the English-speaking landlords wanted to make money from the territories that belonged to the Gaelic speakers from the land. So they forcibly evicted Gaelic speakers from the Highlands of Scotland, sometimes to Canada, sometimes to the US or Australia, New Zealand. And those that went to Canada were successful in maintaining their language and their culture for a long period of time. So in Nova Scotia, because Nova Scotia is quite rural, it was easy for the Highlanders when they got there, for the Gaelic speakers when they got there, to maintain a sense of community, which they did from the 1800s right up into the modern day. And in fact, at one point in Canada, there were 250,000 Gaelic speakers in the the late 19th century. So almost as many Gaelic speakers in Canada as there were in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite a mass movement of...
yeah, it was a mass movement, a huge mass movement.
I imagine it must have been similar to Ireland. It must have had a very powerful impact on the Gaelic-speaking community in Scotland.
It did. It had a huge impact on the Gaelic-speaking community in Scotland. This process of migration, forced migration to begin with. Then in the 20th century, the start of the 20th century, more kind of economic migration where people chose to emigrate, and still quite often to Canada, where there were Gaelic-speaking communities maintained there right up until there's still Gaelic-speaking communities, very few native Gaelic speakers left, but a very vibrant Gaelic cultural community and a lot of revived interest in learning Gaelic language. So a very active Gaelic scene in parts of Nova Scotia and Great Britain in particular.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. We've heard a similar story for the other Celtic languages like Irish and Welsh. There's sort of a revival going on.
Yeah.
That's good news.
And are you also implicated in promotion of Gaelic over there, or is it's only in Scotland?
For Bòrd Gaelic, because it's a Scottish government organisation, our priority is in Scotland, but we do maintain links with Canada as well.
Mm-hmm. Because I saw you also have some website completely devoted to an agenda, let's say, of activities, things you can do in Gaelic, concerts and so on.
Yeah.
But so that's only about what's happening in Scotland. There are no.
Yeah. There's separate. The Nova Scotian government has a department dedicated to promoting Gaelic language and culture also.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
A sister organization.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay. And
some music?
Yeah.
I see you looking at the clock.
We're halfway.
We're halfway our program. And then mostly we play some music.
Yeah. I've been playing Runrig.
Great.
At the beginning of the show. It's a band I've known for a long time. I've seen them live before. I've actually played them several times on the show already. I've got one of their albums at home. And then I just played Nightworks. Apparently they are going to quit this year. I was looking around for some more Gaelic music. I found Marianne Kennedy. Is someone I've also seen live a long time ago. I know she once participated or won the the Minority Languages Festival in Friesland. What's it called? Lied Internationaal, I believe. By the way, if you have any suggestions for music to finish the show in half an hour, feel free to drop some names, because we always like to find out new stuff. So, okay, a short break with Marianne Kennedy then.
So
just hang on the phone and we'll come back soon.
Yeah.
All right, Marianne Kennedy was this. Welcome back, Michelle.
Hi.
Okay, and maybe we should jump ahead a little bit and talk about the language itself and the language today. You teach the language, so you have more of a insight as an instructor, a language instructor. We like that here on this show. Is, was there something that you wanted to say?
No, I noted some specific characteristics of Gaelic, which are interesting.
That's interesting. I do speak a little bit Welsh, so I like to compare the two. Because we know it's a Celtic language, but the Celtic languages aren't really that known in the rest of Europe, so they're a bit of they always have this sort of a magical mystery to them.
Yes.
The reputation of being like fairies and leprechauns and the like. Is Scotland still a bit superstitious like that?
I think it is. I think there's parts of Scotland where, people are superstitious.
Okay. All right. And what is you wanted?
Yeah, of course it's VSO, like the other.
VSO, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And but there are things that are specific for Gaelic and that are different from other Celtic languages. Then.
Yes, I think so. I think maybe not. I mean, they're all slightly different. We all have initial mutation, which for speakers from other European languages is intriguing and perhaps challenging.
It's a hell to learn.
Yeah. Well, initial mutation in Scottish Gaelic is not as difficult as it is in Welsh. So
that's great to hear.
We have less initial mutation. But we do have some internal mutation as well, which, if I remember correctly, Welsh doesn't. Our mutation system in Scottish Gaelic is a little bit easier as well than Irish. When the languages began to diverge, Scottish Gaelic, the morphology, the syntax became a little bit more straightforward, whereas Irish maintained the older forms of the syntax, and Scottish Gaelic maintained the older phonology. So Scottish Gaelic is a really interesting sound system. I believe that it's got more sounds than most other European languages, other than some of the Slavic languages.
It does, because I saw that you only retained 17 letters of the alphabet, but then you use a lot of signs under and over the letter, maybe to do
all the diacritics.
Some diacritics, but not really. It's a system of how you combine the letters of the alphabet. So you're correct. There are only 17 letters, but we have lots of digraphs where you put the letters together, and in digraphs and trigraphs, so in combinations of 2 and 3, make sounds. And then also, depending on how the consonants, what vowels the consonants are beside, whether they're beside what we call a broad vowel, A, O, or U, or whether they're beside a slender vowel, E or I, that will influence the sound of the consonant. So lots of different sounds, but the writing system is actually very logical. It's complicated, but logical and pretty regular. So unlike English, for example, which is not regular, Scottish Gaelic is a regular writing system. Lots of rules, but once you've learnt them, there are maybe a handful of exceptions, and that's it.
I also saw that you have 4 cases. In nouns, is that the same as in Irish?
No, we have I said a minute ago that we are more more innovative or less conservative with the syntax and the grammar, but actually Scottish Gaelic maintains a form of dative that Irish doesn't. So yes, we have a nominative, dative, genitive, and a vocative in Scottish Gaelic, whereas Irish doesn't really have a fully fledged dative anymore. It does show mutation at the start of the word, but it's lost internal mutation, which we maintain in Scottish Gaelic. Where Scottish Gaelic has simplified compared to Irish is that we've got fewer verbal tenses.
And still you have a lot.
I don't think we have a lot of tenses compared to many European languages. I think aspect is more important than tense to talk about the sense of completion of an event is more important than a strict verbal system.
Yeah.
So we don't have a proper present tense. So Irish does have a proper present tense, and we don't. The verbal system in Scottish Gaelic is actually a little bit similar to what they have in Welsh. And some of the philologists think that that's because when Gaelic came to Scotland, it was in contact with early forms of Welsh in the south of Scotland. So there's a possibility
that sounds logic.
System influenced the Scottish Gaelic system.
And then I saw you don't have a verb for to have.
That's correct. Now, that's common really with most of the Celtic languages. Breton
Welsh doesn't have
borrowed
one.
Either, yeah, Breton's kind of innovated one because of close contact with French. But Welsh, Gaelic and Irish don't have a verb to express possession.
No.
And instead of that, we would use, but this is one of the really, I suppose, interesting things about the Celtic languages is that we have something called compound prepositional pronouns. So we combine pronouns with prepositions and use that to modify a lot of what we talk about. So we would have, if I wanted to say I have a pen in Gaelic, I would start with verb ha, then I would have the subject piaun, pen, but I don't have the verb ha is. So it is pen at me. Ac, it's egg plus me, at plus me.
Yes, well, that's like in Arabic, actually.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
They don't have to have either. Huh?
Yeah. And I think that the lack of the verb to have and the presence of these compound prepositional pronouns was one of the things that really puzzled early philologists when they were trying to work out whether the Celtic languages were Indo-European or not, because they're so rare.
Yeah. It's one of the verbs we use a lot, so it sounds very essential. It's a bit bizarre to think of a language that functions without it. Yeah. And you don't have words for yes and no.
That's correct. We would answer either affirmatively or negatively using the verb in question. So if somebody was asking, are you going out tonight? Using going as the question, you would answer going or not going.
Yeah. So there is negation. You can say not going.
Yeah, not going.
Yeah. Okay. It's a bit like tag questions and answers. You don't say yes, but I do instead of
Yeah, I mean, and people use it for emphasis, I think, in other languages. And also, I think it's worth reflecting that we definitely don't have those formats in the formal written language. Sometimes in the oral language, people will borrow yes and no when they're speaking, just because all Gaelic speakers are bilingual as well.
Ah, yeah, of course. Yeah. And then you don't have an indefinite
Article.
That's correct.
article.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
indefinite
And
article.
but when you think of it, we in English too only have one in singular, but don't they plural? In plural there is
that's
none.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting features around the structure of the language, and I think for some coming to learn it, if they've learned, usually in Scotland they'll have learned other European languages like French or German or Spanish from the school systems, and then if they're coming to it as an adult, there's a whole range of different challenges that they've not met before. But I think they're interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, somebody who speaks Arabic will recognize some of those features.
Yeah, and and some of the phonemes as well, because of some of the really guttural phonemes and fricative consonants sound very familiar to me when I hear Arabic being spoken.
Ah, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds interesting. I'll have a closer look at it. So, and you say you are teaching Gaelic. So, where is it being taught? Are there secondary schools where students, the pupils, can follow courses in Gaelic, or are there even courses in school that are taught in Gaelic?
Sure. Yeah. So I teach at a university. So there are 4 universities in Scotland where you can do a degree in Gaelic. So I'm in Aberdeen, and you can study Gaelic in Glasgow or Edinburgh, or the University of the Highlands in Ireland, and their Gaelic college in Skye, Balmoral-Ossory. But Gaelic is available in primary schools either as the medium of instruction. So since the 1980s, we've had a growing number of primary school children that have accessed all of their primary education through the medium of Gaelic. So there's about 60 schools in Scotland where it's possible to study the primary curriculum through Gaelic. Not a lot of children do this, around about 3,000 students at the moment in primary education. And then in secondary education, there's a smaller number continue with their secondary education through the medium of Gaelic. But it's also possible to study Gaelic as an academic subject, as if for our Scottish students, as if they were doing French or Spanish or German. These are the other common languages in the Scottish education system. Instead of that, they could choose to study Gaelic as a learnt language. So a lot of things happening in the education sector around Gaelic at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
That's good news. But studying a language is one thing. Using it is something different. Is there? Is the language still very much alive as a community language? We know there are like 60,000 people still native speakers, but do they support like media, television, radio, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So there's roughly 60,000 speakers of Scottish Gaelic in Scotland at the moment. Approximately half of them live in what we would call heartland communities, where it is the majority language, or certainly more than 50% of the population of those communities speak Gaelic. We've still got some small community areas where there's 60 to 70% of the population are Gaelic speakers. So around about 30,000 people live in these kind of usually island communities off the west coast of Scotland. And then the remaining 30,000 speakers would be spread across Scotland, but quite healthy networks or communities of speakers in cities like Inverness, Glasgow, Edinburgh, and even Aberdeen. You've got small pockets of speakers that come together and deliberately try to use the language either around a school that teaches Gaelic, or as part of a social life, or as part of a music organisation. But yes, within the Western Isles of Scotland, you've certainly got Gaelic as a vibrant community language. Shrinking communities there, and that is a cause of anxiety about to what extent Gaelic will be maintained as a community language, say 20 or 30 years down the line. But that is the focus of much of the work of the Gaelic agency, Bòrd to ensure to support Gaelic in these communities, as well as elsewhere in Scotland.
So officially it's still an endangered language, or isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Which means that there are chances it might disappear.
Yeah, I think there are chances, but I think the fact that it has very high level support. So we have,
apparently
a language act to support it. We have a dedicated television channel. We have a dedicated radio channel. So these are all quite high status interventions that and employment opportunities for people as well, that I think that the language will be maintained to some degree in the future. I don't question that. I think there are anxieties about to what level the language will be used as a community language in some of the heartland areas or former heartland areas. That is the challenge at the moment. But as a language of the whole of Scotland, I think there are lots of people in dispersed pockets that speak the language. And they need to find ways of coming together to use the language, and they do that using social media, using events and so on to have the opportunity to speak the language. And it's, for us at Bòrd it's about creating opportunities as well to use the language.
We also read some news now and then about very rich foreigners who buy a lot of land in Scotland. They're not very keen on learning Scottish, maybe Gaelic, maybe.
That's in fact a universal problem. The same happens in Wales or in Brittany or in everywhere.
That is absolutely a problem about where the language has been vibrant over the last 100 years or so has been in rural areas, and so in common with in Wales and in Ireland, ensuring that young people have the opportunity to be able to continue to live in these communities and to be able to have employment in these communities. These factors are key to the vibrancy or the vitality of the language also, and that is a challenge.
Okay. And do you have also free radios over there? Well, we are a free radio. We are even non-commercial. No publicity on our radio. Is there something like that over there? Is community radio, local radio, free radio?
Yeah, there's community radio in the Western Isles, and that has some Gaelic broadcasting. But we also have our state broadcaster has a Gaelic radio channel. So we have a BBC Gaelic channel.
I've listened to them once before.
Which is really good. So we have both a BBC, so state broadcaster radio, and a state broadcast TV channel, as well as some independent radio broadcasting. And as I said, I think social media is becoming really important as a channel for maintaining the language also.
Yeah, I come across it on Facebook and the likes, and there's a lot of stuff on YouTube, for example. Those are the new channels for languages to go to. So, okay, we're about...
was there anything you would still add? Because I think we're out of questions.
We're out of time.
I'm glad you've been playing music because I think that one of the things that attracts people to learn about Gaelic Scotland or Gaelic is through the music. And we've got a really vibrant and always have had a vibrant music tradition. So please play something nice for your listeners to listen to so that they can experience some Gaelic culture through the music.
Oh, have you been thinking about a tip?
Well, one of my favourite Gaelic singers is Kathleen McInnes.
Could you spell that maybe? Or maybe... yes?
I sent it on email. I don't know whether you can see it so that you could read it.
No, then we need to make a little detour. But maybe if you just spell it, he can... Kevin is sitting at the computer and maybe he can find it on YouTube.
Okay, so Kathleen is Kathleen, and then her second name is McInnes, MacInnes.
McInnes.
Yeah?
Kathleen McInnes. Yeah, I found her. Okay.
Okay, we'll play something by her then.
A specific song that you
No,
would
anything by her is brilliant.
Because she has a... okay.
Okay.
I'll just pick the first one in Gaelic here.
Okay.
That's... okay.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for your time and good luck with good luck with keeping the language alive over there.
Yeah, tap alive. Thank you.
Okay. And all right, thank you very much. And we'll go out with Kathleen McInnes. Okay.
Martin leven draadste. Bye just now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Oké, voilà, dat was het voor
vandaag.
Voor vandaag. Michelle nog even bedanken. En voor ons zit het er dan ook op, zeker?
Ja.
Dan ga ik Kathleen McInnes nog even opzetten. En dan...
tot over 2 weken dan, hè?
Tot over 2 weken, voilà.
Dan hoop ik... Ja, dat gaan we nog niet zeggen, hè?
Oh ja, okay.
Goed.